Victor hadn't been kidding when he said that the mechanic was going to become more aggressive. The only reason why this week wasn't my last was because I had Orion behind me, as well as a plethora of precautions in place. If you're not familiar with what Orion Pest Control services are, it may help to start in the first story. For example, at Orion, all employees are advised to get lockboxes for their mail, rather than regular mailboxes. It would be far too easy for a neighbor to follow one of us home and fish out a piece of mail and find our names. This is only recommended for people who've had frequent or unpleasant interactions with the neighbors. You could also ward off your mailbox with iron, salt. As always, would work as well, but I'm sure your mailman wouldn't appreciate getting seasoned every time he simply tries to give you your junk mail. When it comes to monetary transactions, cash or preloaded debit cards are the safest, unless you can be certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the person ringing you out is human. Another precaution that I've taken when it comes to the mechanic is that I bought a cast iron fire poker from an antique store. Iron is one of the most effective weapons against the neighbors, though it's best to think of it as an allergy rather than a perfect repellent. Some neighbors will crumple instantly if they're within a few feet of it, while others need direct contact in order to cause anything worse than hive-covered burns. Given that the mechanic must have frequent exposure to iron during his daytime profession, I have to wonder how effective it is against him. I do see him wearing gloves from time to time, so it must do something, even if it's a minor skin irritation. Either it's a pride thing, or he's just that committed to the mechanic bit. I've been keeping the poker in the company truck. Even if it's not lethal to him, I'm sure that getting smacked over the head with it probably wouldn't feel too good. Along with that, I've restocked my salt shells. If the mechanic decides to try anything, he'll have an arsenal waiting for him. I don't have any delusions about being able to kill him. I think that's something only a true hero could accomplish. I'm talking about legendary individuals like Chu Chahulin Beowulf. Or Maui. Peoples whose deeds are so great that their stories live on to this day. Find someone like that in the modern age. Though I would argue that Marc-Andre Fleury comes close. Flyers fans don't interact. Raina suggested bathing the hagstone in salt water to amplify its deterring effects. She also wrapped red thread along the outside of the ring, explaining that it would help enhance its protective properties. It's a good thing, too, since my last interaction with the mechanic promptly at dusk. I would hear the beating of wings outside, and always from the west. I risked a glance out the window one night to find a murder of crows. Ever since I saw the bird's shadow move independently of their owners, I don't look at them. I ignore their calls. I know who they serve. After Raina's addition, the hagstone vibrates against my chest whenever they're near. However, in my case, these were only temporary solutions, unless I wanted to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life and fearing death even more than I did before. But in the meantime, raccoons. A client heard about scratching and chittering in her attic. Her uninvited guest also put a hole in her siding. In other words, it was enough of a mess to momentarily distract me from my own problems. Raccoons are incredibly destructive, chewing up anything that they can get their little hands on. From the client's description, it sounded like we could be dealing with a nest. Mother raccoons can be especially feisty when it comes to protecting their young, so I had Raina join me in case there were any kids. At Orion, we are licensed to use humane trapping methods, so don't worry. No garbage kitties are being harmed. Though I want Yins to know that raccoons are not to be underestimated. They may not try and take your soul, like some of the pests out there will, but they can spread a variety of diseases, including rabies, roundworm, among others. They also present a major fire hazard when they claw their way into a home, since they can chew through wiring like nothing. The first thing we had to do was identify the garbage kitty's entry point. Raina opted to go on the roof while I investigated the attic. The first thing I noticed was the telltale stench of dried urine. Yep, those were droppings over there in the corner. Delightful. Looking around, I found that the raccoon had torn out a few chunks of insulation, but nothing that wouldn't be too difficult or expensive to replace. All in all, it seemed like it'd be an easy call. Then, I felt the hagstone begin to tremble. Not long after, Raina screamed. I rushed out, my heart surging with panic, as I was greeted with the frenzied calls of crows. Shit, They followed me. She was on the ground, swinging her silver-tipped knife clumsily against the swarm of black feathers swirling around her. I heard her cry out again as I got closer to her. Then suddenly, the cloud of feathers dispersed, twisting towards the sky with a cacophony of angered caws. Raina had managed to get some salt in them before they could gouge her eyes out. My hand was coated with blood as I guided Raina towards the house. She'd managed to keep her eyes, but they'd shredded her with their beaks and talons. I could feel her shaking as we retreated from the horde. Raina tried to hide it, but she was crying, the tears mingling with the blood covering her nose and cheeks like a bandit's mask. The whole time, the hagstone didn't stop vibrating. I think it was the only thing keeping the horde from coming after us. Their calls were piercing as we took cover in the house. The client was alarmed when he saw the state was in. "What psycho-ass raccoons do I have?" I promised I'd explain later. I honestly don't remember what bullshit story I gave her. Then asked her to watch over Raina as I went out to get the emergency first aid kit we keep in the trunk. Raina held me in a grip so tight that it left bruises, pleading, "Don't go out there, please." Now that we weren't on the run, I could see the injuries on her face more clearly. The deepest one went through her right eyebrow, towards the bridge of her nose. The rest were shallow, painful-looking cuts that crisscrossed over her skin. "They can't come after me, and I've got something in the truck that'll make them think twice," I assured her. She did let go. I couldn't find it in me to pry her fingers off, so instead I put my hand over hers, hoping that it was comforting. The client gently pressed a paper towel to the side of Raina's face, her voice heart-achingly motherly as she uttered, "It's okay, honey. Everything's gonna be all right." I'm not sure if it was from the pain or something else, but Raina noticeably stiffened when the client spoke to her in that maternal tone, closing her eyes as if to keep more tears from falling. Her clutch loosened until my wrist was freed, her hand dropping limply to her side. The fucking birds sounded like they were laughing when I marched out to the truck. The sound grated on me as I snatched the fire poker and the first aid kit. "Laugh at this!" I snapped as I swung the poker at the nearest crow. It let out a squeal as the poker grazed its wing, hopping as far out of reach as it could afterwards. They didn't cackle after that. After we cleaned Raina's injuries up, they didn't look quite as terrible, but just to be safe, I dragged her to the hospital. Thankfully, the client was an absolute angel about the whole thing, and understood that one of our employees being injured was going to be a setback. I called up Victor to inform him of the situation, as well as any entry points that we'd found. He took over where Raina and I left off. On the way to the hospital, Raina muttered, "So does my little Alfred Hitchcock moment initiate me as an official Orion employee?" Warily, I gave her a small chuckle. "Yeah, you're one of us now. Lucky you." "Hey, I'll take murder birds over psycho mantis," she replied with a sly smile. Her nickname for the mechanic. I think it's from a video game. I don't know. Never quite got into them. It was quiet for a moment. The smile faded away as she distinctly said, "I think that's how they do it. They take our eyes. They take you, you know?" I nodded, feeling a lump in the back of my throat, thinking about how the mechanic can control someone just by meeting their gaze. I think you might be right about that. I couldn't help but wonder if the hunt had attacked her simply because she's an Orion employee, or if they were drawn to her because of something else. Was she grieving over something? I don't know her well enough at this point to be able to tell. They hadn't hesitated to go for her eyes. If that was the case, that'd make her the most vulnerable of the three of us. Another thing I wanted Ians to know is that when it comes to dealing with the atypical, if you or a loved one has been harmed, one of the best things you can do is support the victim. If you need support yourself, ignore that stupid little voice in your head that tells you not to bother anyone and reach out. Isolation will destroy you in more ways than one. After I got Raina settled in the hospital, I made a beeline to the river to find another hagstone. Clearly, Raina was going to need one too. Naturally, the stupid birds followed me, causing my hagstone to quiver nonstop. I went into the woods, armed with my tool belt and the iron poker. I opted out of taking the shotguns simply because I was going to need a free hand to look for another hagstone. There was a part of me that hoped one of them would try something, so I'd have the opportunity to smack the shit out of them. While I was searching, among the crows' calls, I heard whispers. They sounded close, like they came from behind a bush some 20 feet away. But I believed the false egg when it said that the whispering thing likes to confuse its victims. Without listening to what they were saying, I glanced around me as the river's cold water rushed around my boots, trying to figure out what was stalking me. The whispers pretended to move further away, but still, I couldn't see the thing causing them. I clutched the poker tighter. The crows had stopped their chattering. They heard the voices too. Hold on. What were they all looking at? Gingerly, I pulled out the hagstone and held it to my eye in the direction of the crows' gazes. At first, it looked like one of the trees, until I was able to make out a triangular head with eyes the size of basketballs. It held up two massive folded appendages that lined with sharp spines. It looked to be as tall as a draft horse, yet it was so still that I couldn't even tell if this huge animal was breathing. Its whispers were quieter than they'd ever been before. Those huge eyes were fixed on me. I didn't dare move. One of the crows glided to the ground near to the whispering thing, passing in front of my field of view. I stifled a shudder when I saw the state of its frail, humanoid body. Its skin clung like molten wax to its ribs and spine. Tattered wings extended from the sides of its torso. The feathers looked as though they were ripped from numerous other avians and fused to the miserable animal's stretched, contorted arms to make it fly. Where the eyes should have been were empty sockets. A curved beak had been forced into the creature as well, driven into the skull hard enough to leave rigid, fleshy lumps. Now that I've seen it, I think the crows were human. Once. Transformed and disfigured to serve the wild hunt. The crow shuffled a little too close to the whispering thing. Quicker than a blink, the whispering thing's folded appendages shot forward, curving around the crow's midsection, spikes driving to the crow's torso. My mind could barely keep up as the whispering thing then bit the crow's head clean off with a terrible crunch. The other crows began to frenzy, shrieking as they dove towards the whispering thing. Without having to take a step, it snatched another crow out of the air, flesh ripped with a wet, tearing sound. Since the animals were all focused on each other, I took the opportunity to dig frantically around for a hagstone, holding my own against my eye in the hopes that it would lead me to another one. There was a low hum that I felt more than heard, deeper than my chest, as if I was standing next to an amp at a concert. This was followed by an enraged screech from one of the crows. Still, I kept looking. There had to be one. There just had to be. One circular black rock stood out among the rest, the water seeming to outline it from the view of my hagstone. There! I plucked it out of the water, looking over my shoulder to see if either the crows or the whispering thing were paying attention to me. They were too engrossed with trying to tear each other apart. I shoved the hagstone into my pocket and made a break for it, the poker at the ready. One of the crows noticed and let out an ear-splitting cry to alert the others. As I ran, I checked back to see that 3 of the crows split off to pursue me. I wasn't worried about them catching me. The whispering thing was another matter. This was only my second time encountering it, and I hadn't had enough information to identify it, so I didn't want to find out the hard way if the defenses I had on me would be enough to stop it from tearing me apart like it did the crows. There was another low hum that rumbled against my ribs, as the whispering thing used one of its forelegs to swipe a crow out of its way. It had lost interest in them, its huge amber eyes focused on me once again. I prayed that the crows swarming around it would be enough to slow it down. As I raced through the trees, back to where the company truck waited, the whispers started anew. They became louder and clearer the faster I went, interrupted by the shrill cry of the crows. I did my best not to listen to any of them. The last thing I needed was to get led astray by one of my pursuers. A crow swooped close enough for me to smack it with the poker. The sound the bird made when the iron scalded its skin made my teeth clench. The others joined in, bringing me to my knees. My ears ringing, high-pitched, grating, like broken glass against a chalkboard. Disorientated, I swung desperately with the iron poker, again and again, not hitting anything. And among all that, the whispers hadn't stopped. My head rang, ears going numb. One of the shrieks stopped as the poker found its mark. Even as the auditory assault continued, I got to my feet, grabbing the trees closest to me to keep myself going. The whispers became even more frantic as its prey got further and further away. The truck was right there. 2 crows tailing me had finally stopped their dreadful screaming and simmered down to the furious clicking sounds with their beaks, as if they could think of nothing but stripping the flesh from my bones. When one tested the limits of the hagstone as I got close to the truck, I swatted it with the poker, its tip colliding with the creature's skull. The crow's body crashed against an oak's trunk, then went still. As soon as I cleared the tree line, the whispering stopped. I looked over my shoulder. The whispering thing was retreated, only visible for a few brief moments before blending in among the trees. It couldn't leave the forest. That was good to know. I closed myself into the trunk, leaving the furious crows outside. They glared at me from the branches of a nearby oak. After taking a moment to collect myself, I drove back to the hospital, wanting to hand the black hagstone off to Ray before anything else. At a stop sign, I got a text from Victor. He had finished setting traps for the client's raccoon infestation and was going to meet me at the hospital. Raina was chilling in her hospital bed, face bandaged, wearing a hideous blue hospital gown decorated with faded green and pink squares. "Guess who got her rabies shots?" she announced with a sleepy grin, holding her hand up in the air. Someone was clearly given good painkillers. Victor arrived a few minutes later, wearing a black mask that covered his mouth and nose, smelling strongly of lavender. It made my nose itch. "Why do you smell like an old lady?" I complained. The mask intensified his withering stare, voice muffled by the mask. "A lot of blood around here. Probably wouldn't be too good if I smelled it. Lot of blood around here. Probably wouldn't be too good if I smelled it." Raina chimed in, slurring slightly. "If you're gonna eat anyone, go for the receptionist. He was reading Anne Rice, so he'd probably be into it." It was Raina's turn to get the glare. He said flatly, "You're high as a kite, aren't you?" Raina flashed a peace sign. To summarize Ray's condition, she'd be as okay as can be. They had to close up her eyebrow and cheek, and they gave her a plethora of shots to make sure that she didn't catch any diseases from the crows. The hospital doctor wanted to keep her overnight to make sure that she didn't have an infection. Then afterwards, she was going to take some time off work to recover. Also, I slipped the black hagstone into her purse so that it wouldn't be misplaced. After we discussed Raina's injuries, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "So, what can we do about the mechanic?" Raina shrugged. "Grovel? Plead for our lives?" Victor rubbed his eyes. "We might be past that point." I asked Victor about the specifics of his deal with the mechanic. I knew there had to be some sort of condition that had to be fulfilled before the mechanic could take someone. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be alive to type this right now. Raina was equally curious. The boss seemed reluctant to speak on this matter. I told Victor that he didn't have to share anything if there was any possibility of retaliation. The last thing I wanted was for him to be punished in some horrific manner for trying to help me. He eventually shrugged his shoulder in resignation. "Whatever happens, I can handle it. It didn't take him long to figure out that I was the one that helped you find the hagstone. That wasn't pleasant, but..." He went quiet for a second, his eyes glazing in a way that reminded me of when I first came home from active duty. He then shrugged again. "I'm willing to risk it, if that means getting a chance to hurt him back someday. Lord knows it's been a long time coming." He didn't tell us what the consequences had been for assisting me, and neither Raina nor I pressed the issue. Some mysteries are best left unsolved. Even though I was nervous to hear the answer, I didn't pull any punches, straight up asked, "Why hasn't the mechanic sent you after me yet?" Victor considered this for a moment, then explained, "I'm not sure on the specifics. Since the mechanic doesn't tell me anything, other than what I need to know to get the job done. But from what I can tell, he takes those who are dead, dying, or dead inside. I guess is the best way to put it. Some souls appear to be harder for him to take than others. The hard ones need to be broken down first. He says you're not ready. Raina numbly asked, "So, if the birds tried to nab me, does that mean that I'm ready? That they could take me at any moment?" Victor hesitated before replying. "We won't let that happen, alright?" Raina nodded, eyes low. I wanted to ask her what was going on, to figure out why she was suffering in a way that made her fair game to the crows. But she had been through enough for one day. That discussion could wait for another time. My next question was another one that I dreaded the answer to. "And where do you come into all of this, Vic?" Regretfully, Victor admitted, "I bring him the ones that are ready, that he can't get to himself." He glanced at Raina. "As of right now, keep that hagstone on you at all times, even wear it when you're sleeping. The mechanic doesn't know who you were initially, but I guarantee the fucking lessers tipped him off. I think he's more focused on Nessa at the moment. But if I get sent after you, hit me with iron, salt me, do whatever and don't feel bad about it. Same goes for you, Nessa." I hated this. I hated that he was being used like this. I hated that he spoke about someday being sent to drag one of us to meet our fate at the hands of the Wild Hunt, as if it were unavoidable. The air suddenly felt like it was much thinner in the room. Somehow, I got enough oxygen to ask, "What if I learned the mechanic's true name? Would that end this?" Victor let out a soft scoff, rubbing at the bridge of his nose over his mask. "Probably, but good luck with it." I had already figured out that the mechanic wouldn't dance around a fire singing his true name all willy-nilly like Rumpelstiltskin, but I couldn't accept that all of us were screwed. There had to be a way. I had to believe that there was a way. I announced that I'd be back in the morning. Raina looked as concerned as her painkillers would allow. After a while, Victor jumped out of his seat. "What are you going to do?" he demanded. "I'm going to talk to him. One of us is in the hospital, and the other one of us is undead. I know it's looking bad right now, but they can easily get worse if whatever you're thinking of doing goes south," he cautioned. "I'm just going to go see if there's some way I can, I don't know, talk him down? I haven't gotten that far yet, but something needs to be done." He didn't look convinced, and with how terrible my argument was, I don't blame him. "I'll go with you." I motioned towards Raina. "And leave her alone?" Raina, looking like she was fighting sleep, groggily said, "I've got the Adderstone and I'm in public. I'll be fine. If you're going to confront Psychomantis, you're going to need Vic around more than I will." Victor agreed. "Like it or not, you're not handling this alone. Remember what I told you when you got hired in? We're not heroes. We're pest control specialists. You know that thing I said about not isolating yourself? I can be bad about not following my own advice sometimes, especially that one. Going forward, I do want to note that the decisions that were made on that night were extremely risky, and I don't recommend for anyone to repeat them. Believe it or not, we are professionals." On our way to our destination, we stopped by a 24-hour convenience store. Victor was about to question me until he saw me go for the whipped cream. I also got s'mores supplies, thinking that maybe some bribery would help make the mechanic more amiable. I figured that if he rejected them, then hey, I like s'mores too. Afterwards, we followed the path to the skull trees. Hey listeners, this is Dante's Disciples, and this is J. Taylor the Reader. I'm excited to get back to this session of Orion's Pest Control. I know, I've been away for a hot minute, but life and things take over sometimes. I'd like to thank Adorable Tapeworm for penning such a great story, and please check out their Reddit No Sleep, give them the love and respect they deserve for writing this. As usual, I will ask for a like and a sub. As you know, there are so many AI channels out there, and also so many great narrators, and I'd love to find more time to keep doing this. Let's see if we can get